Shanks just killed Luffy. The man who gave him the straw hat ran him through with his own blade, and you're about to find out why. Blackbeard crawls into Laugh Tale screaming a warning that gets cut short. Gear 5 erupts, and the sky above the island turns gold. Then Luffy closes his eyes, awakens something nobody has ever seen, and a new sun rises out of his chest. Shanks is wounded for the first time in 25 years. A poneglyph reveals a bloodline that betrayed Joy Boy 800 years ago, and Shanks's last name is written on it. Roger left a letter that explains everything. Zoro draws 3 swords against the Yonko who raised them, and in the final chamber, Luffy smiles, opens his arms, and chooses to fall. This is the One Piece story Oda might actually write. Red-haired man knelt at the center of a chamber lit by a golden light that came from no sun anyone had ever known. In his hands trembled a straw hat marked with a fresh crimson stain. Before him lay the only boy he had ever sworn to protect. How did Akagami no Shanks come to strike down the Mugiwara he himself had chosen as the heir to the Pirate King? The answer begins exactly 25 years earlier. The Oro Jackson crew had reached Laugh Tale on a starless night, guided by the 3 red poneglyphs and a will that needed no maps. Roger walked first toward the final chamber, arms wide open and a childlike smile that none of his crewmates had ever seen on his face before. Behind him came Silver's Rayleigh, Kozuki Oden, Buggy the cook's apprentice, and a young redhead named Shanks, who barely lifted his eyes out of respect. When Roger entered the chamber and saw what was inside, the silence held for exactly 3 seconds before bursting into a laugh that shook centuries. Rayleigh smiled with damp eyes, understanding instantly. Oden brought his hands to his mouth. Buggy didn't get it and blamed the fever for everything. Shanks, on the other hand, was the only one who didn't laugh. The young man stared at what lay inside for a full minute, feeling something break silently inside his chest. That night, while the crew drank to celebrate reaching the end of the world, Shanks walked off alone toward the shore and stared at the Black Sea. Roger sat down beside him without a sound, passing him a bottle of sake the young man took without looking, lost in a bitter silence cutting through him. "We came too early, son," Roger said in a tired voice. 20 years too early. This treasure isn't for us. It's for someone not yet born. Shanks took his time answering. When he spoke, his voice came out broken like a child's, whose long-awaited toy had just been ripped from his hands. "Then why did we come?" he asked without looking up. "What was all this for, Captain, if we won't touch it, if we'll pretend we never saw it?" Roger looked at him for a long time before answering, and when he spoke, his voice no longer sounded like a pirate captain, but like a father explaining something to his son. "We came so someone like me could leave it untouched, Shanks, and so someone like you could wait 20 years watching over the path of the air." The young man didn't reply. Roger didn't press him. The two of them stayed silent until dawn, while inside the chamber behind them, a sleeping light kept glowing. The next day, before setting sail, Roger locked himself alone inside the chamber for a full hour, writing something on a scroll he tucked away on the altar. No one ever knew what he wrote that day or to whom it was addressed, because Roger sealed the door before stepping out and spoke a single remembered line. "If anyone returns to this island without me, let them read what I left. The rest of the treasure isn't for hands, it's for whoever arrives loving first." Shanks burned that line into his soul and didn't think of it for years, while the crew dissolved at Logtown and the world began to change forever. 3 years after Roger's farewell on the scaffold, Shanks woke aboard his ship in a cold sweat, with a new certainty driven into his chest like a nail. He knew why Roger had not taken the treasure. He had arrived early, yes, but there was another reason, a reason written in that letter he never read. From that night on, Shanks began to plan in silence, not to his nakama, not to anyone. Alone, before the sea, he built a decision over 2 decades, because there was something Roger hadn't understood, something Shanks did. The world didn't need to wait for another Roger. The world needed to finish what Roger left open. Years passed. Shanks founded his own crew. He became a Yonko, and one day, in a village called Fuchsia, he found a boy who laughed like Roger. That boy was named Monkey D. Luffy. 7 years old, broken smile, a hunger for freedom. Shanks hadn't seen since that night beside Captain Roger himself. Shanks watched him for months, pretending to be a cheerful pirate passing through, drinking at the tavern, letting himself be insulted, all while measuring the boy with hidden eyes. That day with the Sea King, when Shanks lost his arm saving Luffy, he didn't do it only out of love. He did it because he understood the boy was him, the heir Roger had foretold 20 years before, the one who would arrive right on time, the one who would close the cycle Roger had left open on purpose. Shanks handed him the straw hat that afternoon, smiling while the breath escaped from the sacrificed shoulder, sealing with that gesture a secret oath made in silence. He told him, "Bring it back to me when you become a great pirate. And the boy cried, promised, and clutched the hat without understanding the game above, because Shanks knew something not even Roger had told him, something he'd uncovered reading abandoned poneglyphs, crossing pieces no one in 8 centuries had ever crossed. The final treasure of Laugh-Tale could not be stolen. It could only be inherited. To inherit it, someone with the Nika fruit had to fall inside. That someone, that day in Fuchsia, had just received a hat with a trusting smile. That someone trusted without knowing that trusting Shanks would extinguish him. Shanks knew it as he said goodbye. That's why he smiled. He wept inside while laughing outside. He was handing a child his destiny, and the child accepted. 25 years after that night, Shanks would return to the final chamber. This time, he would not laugh. This time, he would finish all of it. But first, he had to make sure the boy arrived. The boy was the key, the lock, and he was walking toward the world's last sea. 25 years later, the Thousand Sunny was sailing the final waters, bound for the last stretch of Red Line, the wall that split the world from the other side. Monkey D. Luffy sat on the lion head of the Sunny, the straw hat tipped low over his eyes, and a giant grin painted across his entire face. Behind him, the 8 Nakama who had crossed the Grand Line were preparing for the impossible, finding Laugh-Tale, the island no one had set foot on in centuries. Nami checked the triple log pose. Robin translated the last fragments of red poneglyphs. Frankie tuned the coup de burst. Chopper mixed medicines with trembling hooves. Zoro sat alone on the upper deck, cleaning his 3 katanas with an old cloth, sensing something in the air he could not yet put a name to. Ever since they had left the final archipelago, Zoro had been sleeping badly. The conqueror's Haki Luffy had unknowingly passed to him, whispered warnings without clear words. But he said nothing. He was Zoro. If the captain was sailing toward Laugh-Tale with joy, Zoro followed behind with swords ready, and his instinct held silent. Suddenly, the sea ahead of the Sunny lit up with intense red light, and Nami screamed from the bow something that would freeze any soul cold dead. It's the entire world government fleet, battleships, vice admirals, Cypher Paul, all of them together. They're waiting for us lined up along the last mile of Red Line. Luffy leapt to his feet and stared ahead with serious eyes. It wasn't 10 ships or 50. It was 1,000. A full fleet deployed only to stop them. On the stern of one of those ships, the Gorosei watched through their spyglasses with faces marked by decades of knowing too much about too many things. One of the elders, St. J. Garcia Saturn, spoke first in a heavy voice. The heir of Joy Boy is too close. If he crosses the red line, everything changes. Behind the Gorosei, in the shadow of the cabin, an impossible figure watched them in silence. Im-sama, the hidden sovereign, the king no one knew existed. Im-sama barely spoke, his words falling like sentences. He will not cross. Send the entire fleet, and if anything fails, the protocol with the redhead remains active. The Gorosei exchanged tense glances. St. Nusjuro gave the slightest nod. The redhead protocol had been waiting 25 years to activate properly until this moment. Meanwhile, on the Thousand Sunny, Luffy finished pulling on his gloves and let out a giant laugh in the face of the fleet blocking their horizon. Shishishi, there's a lot of them, guys, but we're better. Everyone, get your weapons. We're cutting our way through to Laugh-Tale, even if we have to break the whole sea. But before any of them could move, the sky above the government fleet darkened, as if a massive cloud had suddenly blotted out the sun above. A red bolt struck the marine flagship, and 3 battleships exploded instantly into shards of iron and burning bodies tumbling down into the sea below. Luffy widened his eyes in surprise. Zoro unsheathed Wado Ichimonji in a single motion. Nami pointed the log pose at the cloud. Robin recognized the haki first. That's Conqueror's haki of the highest level, Robin said softly, her voice trembling just a little. Only 3 people in the world can release it like that. From within the cloud emerged the Red Force, the giant ship of the Red Hair, with its black sails unfurled and its captain standing on the bow smiling. Shanks held his right arm extended, Griffin sheathed at his belt, and his eyes locked on the Thousand Sunny as if he had spent 25 years waiting. Luffy saw him from far off, and his heart exploded with joy. He forgot the fleet, the Gorosei, Laugh-Tale. All he could see was Shanks. Shanks! He shouted with all his soul, leaping onto the head of the Sunny. Shanks, you came. You came to see me before I give the hat back. Shanks smiled, but behind that smile was something no one on the Sunny managed to see, something not even the allied Yonko knew about the redhead. Shanks extended his hand and released another pulse of Conqueror's haki over the government fleet, and 200 battleships fell unconscious into the sea instantly. The Gorosei, in the distance, watched the scene without speaking. Saint Saturn clenched his teeth. Im-sama, in the shadow, whispered something. He's playing his part, brother. Shanks leapt from the Red Force toward the Thousand Sunny with a burst burst of haki that shook the sea. He landed in front of Luffy and embraced him. "You made it, kid. You reached the last port. I'm proud. And we're going to do this final stretch together. I'll personally escort you to Laugh Tale." Luffy was crying with joy. The Mugiwara celebrated. Shanks was smiling. But Zoro, standing back, noticed something nobody else did. Shanks's eyes weren't laughing. Zoro tightened his grip on Wado Ichimonji and muttered to himself almost like a prayer. "Watch your back, Captain. Something here smells very wrong." The Red Force and the Sunny sailed for 3 days over a sea no map had ever recorded, a sea where even the stars didn't shine like outside. Luffy spent those 3 days on the deck of the Red Force, laughing with Shanks, drinking sake, listening to stories of Roger he had never heard before. What Luffy didn't know, what none of the Mugiwara yet suspected, was that every story Shanks told was a goodbye written in code. The first story Shanks chose to tell was about the day Gold D. Roger wept silently in front of everyone without a single one of them understanding. It was on a small island, Luffy, a sick village, a plague the Marines refused to cure because they considered them enemies of the world government. Roger went ashore alone without telling us. He spent every gold piece the crew had buying medicine. He stayed 3 weeks tending to the village's sick children. A boy died in his arms, Luffy. His name was Tom. He was a redhead like me. Roger held him to the end and sang him a lullaby. When he came back to the ship, he didn't speak for 2 days. Then he drank sake until he passed out. And at dawn, he laughed like nothing happened. He never mentioned it again. Luffy listened with shining eyes. Shishishi. Roger was an amazing guy. I wish I could have met him. I wish I could have drunk sake with him just once. Shanks looked at him sideways with a sadness that didn't reach his smile. "You already drank sake with him, kid. He's inside you. He always was." Luffy didn't understand the line. He kept eating meat. He laughed at a joke Lucky Roo made. But Shanks stared at the sea for hours that night, and that was the first story he would tell him. The second, the next day, would be the last thing Luffy would ever hear about true love. At dawn on the second day, Yasopp showed Luffy Roger's master shot. 3 coins in the air, 3 perfect bullets, exactly 2 seconds flat. Luffy obviously couldn't do it, but Shanks could. He did it with his left hand. 3 coins in the air, 3 perfect bullets, all clean. The Mugiwara cheered enthusiastically. Luffy clapped louder than anyone in the group, but Zoro in the back noticed what the others didn't. Shanks didn't smile after. That night, Shanks told him the second story. The only fight Rayleigh and Roger ever had face to face in all the days of the Oro Jackson. Rayleigh wanted to stay on an island with a woman, a bartender, Luffy, Shakuyaku. Roger told him he couldn't. The voyage went on. The sea was calling. They argued for 6 hours, face to face, without a single touch. Then they drank. Then they hugged. Rayleigh sailed with Roger the next day, weeping quietly. Shakuyaku waited 20 years for him, kid. 20 years pouring drinks, watching the door, and Rayleigh, every time he looked at the sea, thought of her wide awake. Luffy listened closely. "Shanks, did you ever regret following Roger to the end? Not stepping off the ship when you could have chosen something else?" Shanks took his time answering. He looked at the fire. He looked at Luffy, and he said something the boy wouldn't understand until much later, when it was too late. "I don't regret it, kid. I never would. But sometimes I wish Roger had let me step off, that he had told me I wasn't ready." Luffy stayed thinking. For the first time in the voyage, he sensed Shanks was hiding something enormous from him, but the feeling passed fast, because he was Luffy. What neither Luffy nor anyone else noticed was that Shanks had told exactly 2 stories, 2 goodbyes, one for the father, one for the friend. On the 3rd day, before dawn, Odin appeared in Luffy's dreams, not as a ghost, as a memory. He whispered something to him that he forgot. On the Thousand Sunny, Zoro wasn't drinking. He stayed awake at night, sharpening his katanas, watching the Red Force with eyes that never let go of the redhead captain. Robin was noticing things too. She had read the ancient language for 20 years, and something in the inscriptions of the poneglyphs didn't match what was happening. At dawn on the 3rd day, the sea parted before the ships, and an island wrapped in golden mist slowly revealed itself, floating like a memory. Laugh Tale, the last port, the island where Roger had laughed 25 years ago. The island no map had ever known, where everything ended or began. Luffy went silent for the first time in his life. He stared at the island with his mouth open, eyes full of tears he could not explain. Shanks, beside him, didn't speak either. He had his hand on Griffin, his eyes locked on the island, and an expression Luffy could not read at all. The 2 ships dropped anchor in a small bay, ringed by black rocks. The beach had white sand, and the wind smelled of something ancient, waiting. The Mugiwara disembarked first onto the white sand. The Red Hair's men climbed him down behind. Luffy walked straight toward the jungle. Following an instinct, Nika was whispering to him. The island was silent, too silent. There were no birds, no insects, no wind among the leaves, only the distant echo of an ancient laughter. They walked for an hour until they reached an enormous temple, carved in white stone, with a giant door covered in inscriptions in the language of the Void Century. Robin approached the door and began translating aloud, her pulse trembling for the first time in years as she read the ancestral words. Here rests the last dream of Joy Boy. Here waits the treasure that cannot be taken. Here the cycle closes when the king returns home. Luffy didn't understand any of it. Shanks did. The redhead felt his heart stop inside his chest when he heard those exact words, the same Roger had said. Before anyone could speak, a tremor shook the entire island, and from behind the temple emerged an enormous figure, laughing with that familiar cackle. Marshal D. Teach, Blackbeard, the most dangerous Yonko in the world, stood before them, clothes in tatters, covered in scars, a deranged smile across his face. Say ha 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 ha. Luffy, Shanks, you're late. I got here 2 days ago. My crew is down on the other beach, but I uncovered the truth first. Behind Blackbeard lay fallen figures. Shiryu, Lafitte, Doc Q, every commander struck down, defeated by something the island itself had done to them all. Blackbeard was the only survivor, but he was gravely broken. He was missing his right arm. He had a giant scar across his chest. Dark blood ran from his eyes. The island didn't accept me, Mugiwara. The island knows who it's waiting for, and that someone is you. But before you go in there, I have something to tell you. Shanks took a step forward, tense, hand on Griffin. Luffy stared at Blackbeard, understanding nothing, still processing that his rival had fallen. Zehahaha. Shanks, long time no see. 25 years now, Redhead? Since that night at the bar in Sabaody. Remember what I saw in your eyes that cursed night? Shanks didn't answer. His face hardened. Luffy looked at Shanks, looked at Blackbeard, and for the first time felt a thorn driving itself into his chest. I saw exactly the same thing I saw in Roger's eyes the night before he turned himself in. I saw the look of someone who has already decided something terrible. Luffy turned slowly toward Shanks, still not understanding, but with his heart starting to beat harder than it should before a dying Blackbeard. Shanks didn't look at Luffy. He kept his eyes locked on Blackbeard with a coldness the Mugiwara had never seen in the man with the hat. Teach, shut up before I shut you up, Shanks said in a low voice, no inflection, as if he were reading a sentence written 25 years ago. But Blackbeard laughed. A hollow cackle, sick, choked through his teeth as he dropped to his knees on the dirt of the ancient temple, barely strong enough to stand. Zehahaha. Mugiwara, ask him right now. Ask him why in 25 years he never once fought you for real. Ask him what he's saving for the temple. Shanks extended his left hand toward Blackbeard without moving, and the air around the fallen Yonko grew dense with a black pressing conqueror's hockey. Ask him why he trained your Gear 5 and your Gear 7 without ever fighting you. Ask him what he needs from the Sun God. Ask him about Roger's letter. Before Blackbeard could finish, Shanks appeared behind him at impossible speed and ran his body through with Griffin in a single clean stroke. Marshal D. Teach fell to the ground finally and fully defeated. The most feared Yonko in the world fell laughing, never finishing the line that would have revealed everything to Luffy. Silence fell over Laugh-Tail like a slab of stone. The Mugiwara stood paralyzed. Shanks's men dropped their gaze. Luffy was looking at Shanks. Luffy, Shanks said, sheathing Griffin with a smile that tried to be warm but no longer fooled anyone. The old man wanted to confuse you. Luffy didn't reply right away. For the first time in his life, the Mugiwara felt something he had never felt before, a small doubt driving itself in. Shanks, what was the letter? What was that Gear 7 thing? Why did he say you never fought me? I thought we were friends my whole life. Shanks stepped closer to Luffy and laid his hand on his shoulder. Eyes softened. The same smile, the fatherly tone from Fuchsia. Luffy, Blackbeard told you that because he wanted to plant doubt. He was a defeated pirate. His last revenge. What he said makes no sense. I love you, kid. Luffy looked at Shanks for a long moment. Zoro, behind him, had his 3 katanas drawn, ready for anything. The other Mugiwara held their breath. But Luffy, because he was Luffy, decided to believe Shanks. 25 years of trust against one line from a fallen enemy. The decision was automatic. Shi, you're right, Shanks. Blackbeard was always a liar. Come on, let's go into the temple together now. I want you to be the one who shows me the One Piece first. But Shanks shook his head, still smiling, and proposed something that at first sounded funny and would soon reveal itself as the worst trap. Luffy, if you have any doubt left, fight me. For real. Here, now. If I beat you, Blackbeard was right. If I don't, you trust me. Luffy blinked, surprised. Zoro tightened his grips. Nami took a step back instinctively. Robin narrowed her eyes. Something about the proposal smelled very wrong. Shanks, fight for real? Here? Now that we finally made it to Laugh-Tail? Can't we go in first, see the treasure, and then test each other? Shanks shook his head with a a strange firmness. Before, Luffy, before going in. It's a ritual. Kings always measure each other at the door of the last port. Luffy thought for a few seconds. He looked at Zoro, who gave him a slight shake of the head. He looked at Nami, who was pale. He looked at the temple calling to him, and he accepted. Because he was Luffy. Because fighting his hero was something he had dreamed about 1,000 times since he was 7. Because he trusted more than anyone. All right, Shanks, a king's fight then. But don't get mad if I win, eh? She. I'm stronger now than when you handed me the hat. Shanks smiled with sadness. A sadness Luffy could not read. A sadness only Zoro managed to suspect from 20 meters back. The two of them walked off about 50 meters down the beach. The Mugiwara and the Red Hair's crew stayed by the temple, forming a silent circle around them. And it began. The strangest fight in piracy began. A fight where two men were fighting for completely different things without ever telling the other. Luffy activated Gear 5 instantly. His body was wrapped in that impossible white energy. His hair turned heavenly, and the laughter of Nika came pouring out. The sky above Laugh-Tale changed color. The clouds twisted into rubber spirals. A golden light wrapped the whole island as Luffy floated weightless above. Shanks didn't activate anything visible. He simply unsheathed Griffin with his left hand and smiled with that calm smile that had hidden 25 years of study. The first clash shook Laugh-Tale. Luffy's Gear 5 fist slammed against Griffin wrapped in Black Conqueror's haki, and the beach cracked apart. The Mugiwara were thrown back by the shockwave. The Red Hair's men barely held their footing. Zoro drove his swords into the sand to stay standing. Luffy threw a Bajrang gun. Shanks dodged it with a sidestep. The giant fist tore through the air and obliterated an entire mountain in the western distance. Luffy activated Gomu Gomu no Dawn Gatling, a downpour of white fists covering 50 meters of beach. Shanks dodged every one of them, moving like a dance. While dodging, Shanks was memorizing every angle of the punch, every variation of Gear 5, every new technique of the awakened Nika that Luffy had developed. The spectators in the circle didn't know they were watching an examination, not a fight. But Shanks knew, and Luffy, without realizing, was giving every answer. After 3 minutes of combat, Shanks thought something terrible inside, something that changed his breathing, something Luffy had not yet been able to see. I have it now. I've memorized all of Gear 5. I can end this right now, before the kid suffers anymore. But then Luffy stopped suddenly. Luffy lowered his fists. He deactivated Gear 5 slowly. His body returned to normal, his hair black again, his breathing calm above the cracked sand. Shanks froze. For a second, he believed Luffy was surrendering. For a second, just one, hope crossed the redhead's heart like an impossible bolt of lightning. But Luffy smiled differently. It wasn't the usual smile. It was an older smile, deeper, a smile Shanks had only ever seen once before. Shanks, this isn't all of it, old man. There's something else inside me, something I'm only now learning to listen to. I wanted to show you before the temple. You first. Luffy closed his eyes. He pressed his right hand to his chest. He breathed deep, and something from inside began to wake slowly like a sun rising within him. The ground around Luffy heated up. The sand began crystallizing under his feet. The air boiled. The Mugiwara stepped back, feeling the impossible heat. And then it happened. Luffy's skin turned golden. His hair burst into living flames. Orange, real. His eyes burned yellow, like two small suns. His open red shirt fluttered without wind, stirred by the heat. The purple sash glowed. Luffy was wrapped in living fire, and the fire was not hurting him at all. It wasn't a transformation. It was a revelation. It was Nika in full. The true sun god awakened for the first time in 800 years on the sand of Laugh-Tale. Gear 7, Luffy whispered with a different voice, deeper, as if he were speaking with the mouth of Joy Boy. I know Nika, the true sun, awakened. Shanks went still. He didn't breathe. He didn't blink. For the first time in 25 years, as a Yonko, the redhead felt he was facing something older than himself. Shanks's men stepped back without realizing. Beckman lowered his rifle. Yasopp dropped to one knee in the sand. Lucky Roo let go of the leg of meat he was chewing. Zoro's eyes went wide. Nami covered her mouth. Robin murmured something in the ancient tongue that none of them could catch over the roar of the fire. Shanks, Luffy said with that voice both new and old at once. This is what Zoro taught me. What you were never able to see inside me. And Luffy attacked, but not like before, not playing. He attacked with the fire of the sun god, with the seriousness of a king claiming his true throne. He no Ken, Luffy shouted shouted, throwing a fist wrapped in flames that boiled the air 10 meters out. Fist of the sun, Shanks! Fire never dies! Shanks raised Griffin and met the flaming fist head on. The clash boiled the sea. For the first time in the fight, Shanks was driven back 3 meters. The redhead looked at his own hand. Griffin was glowing red-hot. The Conqueror's haki coating it had weakened under the flame of a Nika fully awakened. It can't be, Shanks whispered, looking at Luffy through the fire. This wasn't in the poneglyphs. This is an awakening Roger never witnessed. Luffy smiled inside the flames. Ace is inside me, Shanks. He always was. The fruit he ate wasn't Nika's, but the fire was always mine. Shanks swallowed and understood. The fire didn't come from Nika alone. It came also from Ace, who had died protecting Luffy and whose spirit he had inherited unseen. Taiyu no Bajrang! Luffy shouted, throwing the Bajrang gun, but wrapped in flame, a planetary fist of living fire that crossed the sky like a flying sun. Shanks dodged it by inches, but the residual fire scorched his right side. His clothes were burned away. Shanks bled just barely for the first time. Hygen! Luffy shouted, and the flames around him pulled in, concentrated into both fists, and exploded toward Shanks at an impossible solar speed. Shanks barely managed to block with Griffin charged to the maximum with Conqueror's haki, but he felt something he hadn't felt since Roger. His left forearm bone cracked. The shockwave from the clash dissolved the clouds in a 50-kilometer radius across the sky. The sun of Laugh-Tale looked like two suns for an instant. Luffy didn't stop. He executed a technique he had never shown anyone. He had discovered it alone on the voyage to Redline, listening to his heart from within. Nika no Odori, Luffy shouted, and he began to dance. Literally to dance. His arms stretched like rubber but burning, spinning into spirals of fire all around him. The dance of Nika filled the beach with living flames, spinning like golden serpents, blocking every escape route, closing the circle around the redhead. Shanks took 3 impacts, one on the shoulder, one on the leg, one on the side. He bled seriously for the first time. Griffin dropped for an instant, but Shanks didn't strike back. He couldn't. He was watching something that destroyed his soul more than any blow could ever destroy his body. He was watching the true Joy Boy. Not the boy from Fuchsia, not the Mugiwara, the sun god in full, the one who had waited 800 years to finally be born. And Shanks, in that moment, wept inside while memorizing every motion of the Hino Ken, every spin of the Nika no Odori, every beat of Gear 7, all of it. Shanks whispered something no one heard, something lost in the roar of the flames. Ace, you're there. Roger, you're there. The sun never left, boys. Luffy kept attacking for another 5 minutes. 5 minutes that melted the sand, boiled the sea, and bent the horizon of the sky with impossible solar force. Shanks blocked, dodged, took it. He never countered for real. He only absorbed every technique of the sun god into memory, recording them one by one with precision, until Luffy began to tire. Gear 7 drained him too quickly. It was too much power for a human body, even the body of the heir of Joy Boy. Luffy slowly deactivated Gear 7. The fire pulled back. His skin returned to normal. His black hair came back, but something stayed in his eyes. Golden. He dropped to his knees on the smoking sand, smiling, breathing with effort, his hands resting on the ground that still boiled from the recently visited sun god. Shanks approached Luffy breathing hard for the first time in the fight, his clothes scorched, blood on his side, Griffon trembling just barely in his hand. Luffy understood, lifting his eyes, that Shanks had allowed all of it, that he had absorbed every blow of Gear 7 without returning a single one for real, deliberately. Shi, now we fought for real, Shanks. Shi, I burned your side, old man. You're gonna need a rest before the temple. But you didn't want to beat me, I know you. But Shanks was no longer smiling. Shanks's gaze was still. Griffin was lowered. His heart was stopped, because he had just seen the full Gear 7 with a true Nika. He had what he needed. He had memorized the techniques of the sun god. He knew the limits of the awakening. He knew how to use the fruit. Enough, Luffy, Shanks said, lowering Griffin with a calm gesture. That's enough. You've made your point. If I'd wanted to beat you, you'd have been down minutes ago. Luffy got up slowly, still exhausted, and approached Shanks with a giant grin covering his whole childlike face under a layer of ash. Shi, so it's true after all. You never wanted to beat me for real? Blackbeard was lying like always. Shanks, sorry for doubting for a second. You're my dad. And Luffy hugged Shanks, a long, childlike hug full of 25 years of accumulated love. Shanks closed his eyes and returned the embrace, holding him tight. Anyone watching Shanks would have seen one tear, just one, falling down the redhead's cheek as he embraced the boy he had decided to extinguish. Shanks whispered something in Luffy's ear that no one else could hear, something so quiet it stayed engraved between just the two of them until the end of the tale. Forgive me, Luffy. Forgive me before you understand what's coming next. Forgive me for everything I loved you for and for everything I'll do in the temple. Luffy, innocent, didn't understand. He thought Shanks was moved by the reunion. He laughed loud, slapped his back, and pulled away with eyes shining gold. All right, enough tears, you sentimental old redhead. Let's go to the temple already. I want to see the One Piece. I've been dreaming about this for 22 years since Fuchsia. Shanks nodded, and then he proposed the last thing he needed to complete the plan. The thing that sealed the fate of Luffy and all the Mugiwara at once. Luffy, before going into the temple, let's do the king's ritual. A toast with sake. You, me, your nakama, my nakama, like back in Fuchsia. Luffy's face lit up. Sake was the most sacred pirate ritual. Drinking with Shanks before the One Piece closed a perfect circle. Beckman, on Shanks' silent order, came down from the Red Force with a barrel of red sake, the redhead ceremonial sake going back to Roger's days. Lucky Roo brought cups for everyone. Yasopp for his son Usopp, who was crying with joy at being reunited with the father he had told tall tales about. The Mugiwara formed a circle with the Red Hair's men on the beach of Laugh-Tale, in front of the temple, beneath the golden sky of the island. Shanks personally poured the sake into the Mugiwara's cups, smiling as he did, his eyes shining in that way that brought Roger to mind. Luffy raised his cup and shouted with all his soul, "To the king of the pirates, to the Nakama, to the One Piece, to Shanks, my hero." They all toasted. The sake went down warm, sweet, with a strange aftertaste no one identified on the first sip because the emotion covered the whole palate. Usopp was the first to fall. He collapsed with the cup still in his hand, his face pale, his eyes unfocused, whispering something none of them caught. Then Chopper, then Frankie, then Brook, whose skeletal body went rigid as the musician's soul resisted the substance with everything it had. Nami fell next, hugging Robin, who also collapsed slowly with her eyes still open, trying to say something, but unable to move her lips even once. Sanji fell kicking a rock, screaming at the sky, cursing without understanding what was happening. Jinbei fell last among the cooks and navigators, jaw clenched tight. Luffy was left standing, dizzy, confused, looking at his nakama on the ground without understanding. The sake was tampered with. The most sacred sake was a trap. Only Zoro was still on his feet. His conqueror's haki, which Luffy had unknowingly passed to him in Wano, gave him greater resistance than the others. Zoro dropped his cup, drew his 3 katanas in one fluid motion, and looked at Shanks with a cold fury no enemy had ever provoked in him before. "You damned redhead! I knew it! I knew it from the moment you stepped onto the Sunny. I'm going to cut you into 3 pieces before you touch my captain." Zoro charged at Shanks with Santoryu Ugi, Rokudo no Tsuji, the most lethal technique in his arsenal, loaded with all 3 haki at maximum level. But before he could reach the redhead, Beckman appeared behind Zoro at impossible speed and struck the back of his neck with his rifle loaded with Conqueror's haki. Zoro fell forward with his 3 katanas burying themselves into the sand, trying to stay conscious, trying to scream at Luffy to run, to flee. "Luffy, don't go in with him," Zoro managed to whisper before his eyes closed over the blood-stained beach. Luffy, dizzy from the sake, looked at Zoro fallen, at Shanks, at his nakama scattered at the temple. His mind was running slow from the ritual drug. "Shanks, what's happening? Why did everyone fall asleep? Why did Zoro attack you?" "Shanks, I don't understand anything. I feel weird." Shanks stepped close to Luffy and laid his hand on his shoulder with that fatherly smile he had used for exactly 25 years without ever failing. "Luffy, it's the final ritual. The nakama sleep while the kings enter the sanctuary. It was always this way." Zoro didn't understand. Beckman just put him to sleep. But Shanks, I feel weird too, like my legs are heavy, like I couldn't fight even if I wanted to right now. "That's normal, kid. It's the ceremonial sake. Only the king enters the temple with a clean mind and a calm body, a tradition of Joy Boy." Luffy nodded, trusting once again, because he was Luffy, because Shanks was Shanks, because 25 years of love don't unravel over a strange sake. "All right, Shanks, let's go then, redhead. Take me inside the temple. I want to see the One Piece. I want to see what Roger saw. I want to finish the dream he started." Shanks nodded. He offered his shoulder so Luffy could lean on him, and the two of them walked together toward the temple's door under the dimming gaze. Zoro, with his eyes half closed in the sand, saw the silhouette of Luffy entering the temple, leaning on Shanks. He cried without being able to move. The temple door closed behind them with the dry sound of stone against stone. The beach went silent. The sky was darkening, and something inside the temple, something that had been waiting 800 years, began to wake up slowly, recognizing the heir who had finally arrived alone. The inside of the temple was enormous. A corridor of white marble stretched toward a circular chamber lit by a golden light pouring down from the ceiling. The walls bore inscriptions in a language older than any known poneglyph. Robin would have spent years translating them. Luffy recognized them without knowing why. Shanks walked beside Luffy without speaking. His left hand rested near Griffin. His breathing was deep, rhythmic, preparing the inevitable body. body. Luffy stared at everything with his mouth open, still dizzy but in awe, with that childlike smile that didn't fade even when the world was collapsing. Shanks, it's beautiful. It's like a dream. Was Roger here? Did he walk down this same hallway? Did he touch these walls with his hands before he laughed? Shanks nodded silently. He didn't trust his voice to answer without breaking in the middle of the line he had been rehearsing for decades. At the end of the hallway stood a circular altar carved with the symbols of the sun, the moon, and a humanoid figure dancing with arms outstretched. Joy Boy, the first Joy Boy, engraved in the stone like an ancient god. Luffy approached the altar and felt the figure smiling at him from inside. Beside the altar on the floor was a poneglyph unlike any other. It was small, dark red, and its inscriptions glowed with a readable inner light. Luffy didn't know how to read the ancient language, but when he approached the poneglyph, something inside him, something that was Nika, began to translate directly, and Luffy, for the first time in his life, understood everything in 3 seconds. The whole Void Century, Roger's plan, what Blackbeard had been after. The first Joy Boy, 800 years ago, was betrayed by his best friend. That friend had extinguished him inside this very chamber to steal from him. That friend, upon consuming the fruit, had been rejected because his soul did not carry the heart of the sun. He had fallen, consumed by stolen power. Before he fell, the one who broke the pact founded a dynasty with the original 20 kingdoms. That dynasty became, over the centuries, the Figureland family, and Shanks was a Figureland, descendant of the one who broke the original pact, heir to the curse of the bloodline that had crossed 8 centuries waiting for this moment. Luffy turned and looked at Shanks, and Shanks was looking at him from behind, with Griffin already drawn, his eyes filled with something strange. It was sadness, an infinite sadness, the sadness of a man who had carried that moment for 25 years and had finally arrived to fulfill it. "You understand," Shanks said in a low voice, almost pleading. "You understand why. You understand I didn't choose this. You understand I've been condemned to this for 800 years. Luffy didn't answer right away. He looked at the poneglyph. He looked at Shanks. He looked at Joy Boy's altar, and he understood something more, something it didn't say. The 800-year cycle could be broken, but only if the Joy Boy of the moment at the last second chose not to defend himself, chose by forgiving. If Luffy fought Shanks and won, he defeated one more Figureland. The cycle continued. If Luffy fought and lost, he fell with hatred. It continued, but if Luffy chose not to fight, if he let Shanks strike him down without resisting, then something in the 800-year curse would shatter forever. Luffy understood, and he smiled. He smiled with that childlike smile Shanks had seen for the first time in Fuchsia. He smiled with the very smile of Roger. He smiled like the man who knew he was freely choosing what came next. He smiled like the king of the pirates who would never reign. He smiled free. Shanks saw that smile, and his heart stopped. It wasn't the expected smile. It wasn't fear or rage or pleading. It was Roger. It was Joy Boy. It was the smile of a man who had just deciphered the trick of the universe and had decided to win by losing, defeating the curse, by surrendering without resistance. "Shanks," Luffy said in a calm voice, no tremor, no fear. "It's okay. Do it. I know why you're doing it, and I forgive you. I always loved you." Shanks took a step back, staggering as if struck. His eyes filled with tears. Griffin trembled in his left hand. "Luffy, no, don't forgive me, kid. Hate me. Make this easier for me. Scream at me, fight me, hate me as I deserve. Don't forgive me, please, not like this." But Luffy didn't listen. Luffy closed his eyes, opened his arms, tipped his hat back to leave his chest exposed. He waited in silence. Shanks wept. He wept like he hadn't wept since Roger left. He wept like a child. And then, with his heart in pieces, he did what was expected. Griffin reached Luffy's chest in a single, clean stroke. The Mugiwara opened his eyes as the blade went in, without screaming, without resisting, smiling. Shanks held him as he fell. He cradled him in the air. He lowered him to the ground with a tenderness no one had ever seen in a Yonko. Luffy said nothing in his final seconds. He just kept smiling, like Roger, like Joy Boy, like the king who never let himself be ruled by fear. And when the light left his eyes, it did so slowly, the way the sea pulls back from a beach at dawn, in no hurry at all. Monkey D. Luffy fell without defending himself. He fell smiling. He fell with the straw hat still resting on the head Shanks had cradled for 25 years. Shanks knelt with the boy's body in his arms, Griffin with the mark on the floor. The temple was trembling. The cycle was closing slowly. For several minutes, Shanks didn't move. He held Luffy's body without speaking, without crying anymore, only breathing with difficulty as the light flickered. Then, slowly, he forced himself to lay the body on Joy Boy's altar, as if he were tucking in a sleeping son after everything. He took off the straw hat with trembling hands and pressed it against his chest, remembering the day in Fuchsia, remembering the mark on his his arm. The temple's inner door, the one separating the chamber from the final sanctuary, had been sealed until that moment. With the heir's essence spilled, it opened. Shanks moved toward the inner door with the hat in his hand and griffin sheathed. His heart was racing. 25 years of waiting were ending. He crossed the threshold and entered the final chamber, the one only Roger and his crew had ever seen. The chamber for which he had just extinguished the boy. And he froze. The chamber was empty. There was no gold, no weapons, no physical treasure of any kind. Only white walls, a small altar, and a letter. Shanks looked at the chamber, not understanding. He swept the walls with his eyes, searching for something, anything. There was nothing. 25 years for an empty chamber. On the small altar at the center sat a rolled scroll, yellowed by time, with a worn red ribbon. Above the scroll, 2 words were written, for Shanks. The words were written in the unmistakable handwriting of the captain who had taught him everything. It was Roger's letter. The letter awaited. Shanks set the hat on the altar. He took the scroll with hands that could no longer control their tremor. He unrolled it slowly. He began to read. "If you're reading this, old friend, it's because I did my job badly. I taught you to laugh, but not to forgive. I taught you to dream, not to let go." Shanks felt a blow to the chest. Roger's voice was reaching him from the beyond, 22 years away, going straight to his heart through ancient lines. "I always knew you were a figureland. I knew it from the day I took you aboard the Oro Jackson, Shanks. I saw the mark of the bloodline in your eyes. I accepted you anyway, because I thought the love we were going to give you was stronger than the curse you carried. I thought you could choose differently. I didn't take the One Piece because I arrived early. No, I told you that so you wouldn't understand. I understood. Walking into this empty chamber, the trick, the treasure was never here, Shanks. The treasure was the journey, the nakama, the fights, the laughter in the storm. The treasure was being alive together. I saw it in an instant, and I laughed because I realized I'd had it the whole voyage without ever once noticing it. And then I knew something else. I knew that one day you would come back, Shanks, that your bloodline would speak, that you'd extinguish the next heir to enter. That's why I'm writing this letter, because I want you to know, when you're reading this over a sleeping body, that what you did was completely useless. You just threw it into the sea, Shanks. The treasure was that boy. It was his entire journey, and you extinguished him before he could finish it. The Nika won't accept you. Your soul doesn't carry the sun. Your bloodline carries the shadow of the one who broke the original pact. The fruit will reject you. But there's one way to redeem yourself. Just one. You know the technique. I taught it to you 20 years ago without telling you what it was for. Now you know. Kami no Henkin, the divine return, the technique that tears the fruit out of the user's body by channeling pure conqueror's haki into the user's own heart. Only Dragon, the Gorosei, and Imsama know it. No one uses it because it extinguishes the user without exception. It's the forbidden technique of those who know. If you use it on yourself, the Nika will leave your body intact. You'll be able to place it on the boy. If you do it within an hour, it can be reabsorbed. One person did it once, the ancient poneglyphs say. I don't know if it's true, but it's the only chance you have now. You decide, I can't help you anymore. I just want you to know before you choose that I loved you like a son from that very first night. The letter had a postscript. Shanks saw it at the bottom of the scroll, in smaller writing, written exactly 25 years ago in ancient ink. P.S. If you ever have a son, Shanks, teach him to laugh before you teach him to fight. Roger. And if you don't have a son of your own, treat the kid like one. Shanks remembered Makino, Ace and Luffy playing together in Fuchsia, Sabo emerging from the dirty forest, the 3 brothers of Dawn laughing together. He had had a son without knowing it. He'd had him all these years, and he had just extinguished him. He had just closed with Griffin the heart that beat. The second sheet of the scroll, smaller, held something else, a drawing, a poorly drawn man with a straw hat standing by the sea. Beneath the drawing, Roger had written, "This is you, Redhead. In 25 years, if you chose well. I hope I'm wrong to doubt it. I hope to see you from there smiling." Shanks ran his fingers across the drawing. Roger had known. Roger had always known. Roger had left the door open for him, and he had closed it. There was a third sheet, even smaller, a song. The lullaby Roger had sung to the red-headed boy who had died in his arms. Shanks read it in silence, a short song, simple, of 4 verses. It spoke of a sea that always returns to the shore like a father to his son. Shanks sang the song over Luffy's body, slowly, his voice broken. He sang it through, twice, for the fallen boy, for Roger. And as he finished singing it, he understood the last thing Roger had wanted to tell him. He understood why he had told the story of Tom, the red-headed boy. Roger hadn't told it because of Tom. Roger had told it because of Shanks. He had been teaching him 25 years ago how a beloved son is sent off. Shanks wept harder. He felt Roger's invasion invisible arms around his shoulders, like when he was young, like when they slept under the Jackson stars. "Forgive me, Captain," Shanks whispered into the empty air of the chamber. "Forgive me for not listening to you in time. Forgive me for waiting 25 years to remember this." And then Shanks understood the last thing, the most important thing, the key the letter didn't even mention, the key only his awakened heart could hear. Roger hadn't written that letter to give him a way out. He had written it for one last conversation, so that he wouldn't go alone without a goodbye. The letter had been, for 25 years, the father waiting for him in the world's last room, waiting to embrace him, to send him off, to say, "I love you." Shanks kissed the scroll, folded it carefully, pressed it against his chest. He rose from the altar. It was time to do what he had to do. He walked back to the chamber where Luffy lay still. Each step weighed more than the last. Each step was a year of life giving itself back. When he reached the body, he stopped. He looked at the boy, he looked at the hat, he looked at the mark on the floor, and he spoke clearly for the first time. "Kid, listen to me carefully. I know you can't hear me, but I'm going to talk to you anyway. I need this to go with you to the other side, if you go. I loved you from the day I saw you in Fuchsia, laughing with Makino. I loved you more when you threw yourself into the sea over a stupid bottle. I loved you even more when you lost an arm for me. I mean, when I lost an arm for you. I loved you my whole life, Luffy, always. Today, I extinguished the only son I ever had. And now, I'm going to extinguish myself giving back what I took from you. It's not justice, it's love, even if it's late. If this works, if you wake up, don't forgive me too fast. Take your time, fight your demons, do what you have to do. But remember, I loved you. And if it doesn't work, if you go to the other side, find Roger over there. Tell him his redhead is remembering him. Tell him I learned too late." Luffy didn't answer. Of course he didn't. But the straw hat moved a little on the altar as if the wind had slipped in from inside. Shanks took that as an answer. He smiled for the first time since the boy fell. A clean smile, no pain, no fear, a forgiven smile, and he began to gather the king's haki into his heart. All of it. 25 years of being a Yonko, 40 as a pirate, a whole life at the point. The forbidden technique demanded exactly that. Everything a man is concentrated into a single heartbeat, and the man stopped being one for someone else. The Nika inside his body began to writhe. Shanks had consumed it mentally when he struck Luffy down, activating the 8-century-old ancestral pact, and the fruit was rejecting him. It was showing him visions, 5 visions, one for each year he had lied, each one worse than the last, with no relief. The first vision was the sweetest, and for that, the cruelest. Luffy as a boy of 7, in Fuchsia, running along the beach, laughing. "Shanks, when I grow up, I'm going to be the king of the pirates. I'm going to surpass you. I'm going to sail with you. I'm going to be just as strong." The vision cut off sharply. Shanks screamed. The Nika was showing him the boy alive before knowing anything, showing him the voice he had just extinguished. The second vision was Ace burning, Ace alive, Ace smiling among golden flames, Ace eating the Nika instead of the Mera Mera, laughing like a sun god. The fire of Gear 7 was Ace Redhead. The Nika whispered with the voice of the dead brother. "He was inside the boy the whole time, and you just extinguished him too." Shanks felt the weight of 2 lost sons, 2 brothers extinguished by the same chain. He fell to his knees. The fruit was destroying him slowly from within. The third vision was worse. Shanks training Luffy for 10 years, together, like Rayleigh had trained for 2 years, but 10, a decade as a master. He saw himself teaching him the king's haki. He saw himself laughing on the deck of the Red Force with Luffy as an adult. He saw himself being the father Roger had asked for. This is the father you could have been, the master you could have been. You threw it all into the sea for a bloodline you never freely chose. The fourth vision broke what was left of his soul. Shanks at Laugh-Tale beside an adult Luffy, the two of them laughing in front of the empty chamber, the two of them understanding together that the treasure was the shared journey, the two of them embracing the way Roger and Rayleigh had embraced before at the same altar. "This is what Roger wrote to you in the letter, Redhead. This is what was waiting for you, not the treasure. This, and you broke it." The fifth vision was the worst, the one that made him decide. Shanks saw himself dying slowly over 3 years, consumed by the fruit, losing his powers. He saw himself losing his nakama one by one. He saw himself losing his memory. He saw himself forgetting Luffy, Roger, Makino, himself completely. He saw Buggy finding his body on a drifting ship, not recognizing him. He saw Makino in Fuchsia weeping alone over the bitter news without an answer. He saw the world going on without Luffy, without Shanks, without Roger, without Joy Boy. The world ruled by Im-sama for another 800 years of total silence. This is your only way out, the Kami no Henken. Either you go out consumed without fixing anything, or you go out giving back the fruit. Choose, Redhead. Shanks shook. He screamed. He struck the altar with his fist until his knuckles split open. And then, in the middle of the pain, he made the most important decision. He was going to use the Kami no Henken. He was going to tear the Nika out of his body. He was going to give it back to the boy. He was going to extinguish himself for him, not for redemption, not for forgiveness, but because he loved him, because he had always loved him. That boy was the last part of Roger he had left. Shanks stood up with the scroll in his hand and walked back until he stood beside Luffy on Joy Boy's altar, still calm. He laid the letter on the boy's chest beside the hat. He knelt at his side. He closed his eyes. He gathered Conqueror's haki into his heart. And the Kami no Henken began, the forbidden technique, the divine return, the final act of love by the broken pact that finally chose the other path. Shanks's body began to glow with a black light that didn't come from outside, but from within, from the king's haki concentrated at the center. The light grew so dense that the entire circular chamber vibrated with the pressure. The 800-year-old walls creaked. The altar trembled slightly. Shanks screamed, a scream that wasn't physical, but deeper. It was the scream of a soul tearing out something that had belonged to it for decades. The Nika began to come out, literally come out. A golden light bloomed from Shanks's chest, slowly taking shape, materializing as a mythical fruit newly summoned. Shanks watched the fruit forming while his own life slipped from his body along with the haki being consumed in the forbidden technique. The Kami no Henken was working, but it was also killing him. With every passing second, Shanks felt his organs shutting down one by one inside. First, his heart began to beat slower. Then his lungs stopped responding. Then his legs lost feeling. Then his right hand went still. But Shanks didn't stop. He clenched his teeth. He held his focus, because if he stopped before finishing, Luffy would fall forever. The Nika would stay trapped. The fruit kept emerging, golden, glowing, vibrating with the heart of the sun that had crossed 8 centuries. Shanks saw it whole, floating between them. Then, with the last haki he had left, Shanks took the Nika in his marked hands and brought it to Luffy's chest, to the wound. He placed it over the mark. He left it there. Roger's theory said 1 hour. No one knew if it was true. Only Shanks could prove it now. Shanks let himself fall beside Luffy on the altar. Griffin dropped with him. The hat lay between the bodies, soaked with marks, both fresh and old. He took the boy's hand with what little strength he had left. He squeezed it gently. He stroked it once, the way Roger had stroked his before. "I'm giving back what you entrusted to me, Captain." Shanks whispered toward the ceiling of the chamber, toward Roger, toward the entire past, toward all that was lost. "And you, kid, forgive me. Forgive me for everything. Forgive me for the wait. Forgive me for the love. Forgive me for being what my bloodline forced me to be. The sun belonged to the two of them, to Ace and to you, kid. The fire was theirs, and I extinguished it without the right. Returning it is justice that comes late. If you wake up, kid, be the king I couldn't be. Be the king Roger waited for. Be the king who frees the world, who doesn't rule it. The hat was always yours. It was never mine. I just looked after it for a while. Carry it to the end of the sea, to where I couldn't reach." And Shanks's smile drew itself one last time, his eyes looking toward the invisible sky of the temple, a tired smile, a free smile, forgiven. Akagami no Shanks fell beside Luffy on the altar of the first Joy Boy, beneath the golden light of the sanctuary, 25 years after Roger fell, and the chamber sank into silence. The Nika still rested on Luffy's chest, not glowing, not moving, not answering, only waiting on time itself. Outside, on the beach, something began to change. Zoro, lying on the sand, opened his eyes wide, his heart pounding like a bolt of lightning striking him. The other Mugiwara began to wake up too on the sand, one by one, confused, disoriented, wondering what had happened, where they were, why their heads hurt so much. Zoro rose first. He looked toward the temple. His haki was screaming that something was terribly wrong inside, that Luffy needed him, that he was running late. "Guys, to the temple, now!" Zoro shouted in a broken voice, drawing his 3 katanas, running toward the stone door with everything he had. The Mugiwara ran behind him, Sanji cursing, Nami crying without understanding, Chopper transformed into Monster Point, Frankie shouting in super, Robin and Usopp at the back desperate. Far from Laugh Tale, in 3 successive waves, the entire world felt the blow. First, it was felt by those who loved him close and raised him. In Fuchsia, Makino was washing glasses behind the bar when she felt a shudder run down her spine, all the way to her bare trembling feet. She set the glass down carefully. She looked out the window. She She saw the sea in the distance, silver under the sun. She knew, without knowing why, that something had ended. In Marineford, old Garp felt something in his chest. He let go of the tea he was holding. The cup shattered against the floor. He just looked at the sea. He thought of two grandsons, Ace fallen years ago, Luffy fallen that morning. The strongest marine of a generation wept alone. At the headquarters of the revolution, Sabo dropped to his knees with his hands on his chest, sensing something nameless. Dragon beside him closed his eyes. "I knew it," Dragon said in a hollow voice. "I told Garp 22 years ago. Shanks was always a figureland. I never fully trusted him." Then it was felt by those who had crossed paths with him on the journey, who owed him their freedom, who had once sworn upon his name in full. In Alabasta, Queen Nefertari Vivi woke from a nap with her heart racing. She had dreamed of Luffy. She had dreamed of a golden light. She had dreamed of farewell. In Amazon Lily, Boa Hancock fell to the floor as if she had been shot. Her sisters cried out. The Kuja wept without knowing why. The Empress fell mute. In Wano, Momonosuke jolted awake in the middle of the night. Yamato held him. The young shogun whispered, "Luffy Dono, something happened to him. I feel it inside. Terrible." And finally, it was felt by the systems of power. Those who had built the world on 8 centuries of silence. Those who had to fear this crack. In Maria Joie, Im-sama felt something break thousands of kilometers away. Something that had been in its place for 800 years had moved out of place that morning. "The cycle is broken," Im whispered from the empty throne with the voice of the fallen god. The Figureland broke his own bloodline. The cycle is broken for the first time. The Gorosei rushed into the hall in alarm. Saint Saturn, Saint Nusjuro, all of them together, feeling the same thing. A crack in the world. A crack of 8 centuries opening. And Buggy, somewhere on the Grand Line, dropped a bottle of sake without knowing why he was drinking. Something was screaming inside his old heart. He stood up suddenly. He ordered them to set sail for Laugh-Tale without explaining. The Cross Guild fleet didn't understand. Buggy didn't explain. He only wept, not knowing yet. In every corner where someone had loved him, someone had crossed paths with him, or someone had feared him, the world felt the crack and began to change. Behind the temple door at Laugh-Tale, the answer waited. An answer no one knew if it would end with 1 king or 2 fallen. Zoro reached the door first, swords held high, eyes wet, his heart already knowing what he was probably going to find inside. He laid his hand on the stone. He pushed with every bit of haki he had. The door gave way slowly, creaking as if 800 years were resisting the witness. The door opened. A golden light spilled out from within, bathing Zoro and the Mugiwara arriving behind him, blinding them for a full second. Jinbei, with his hand on Zoro's shoulder, said an important line to him. The one who enters first carries what he sees, but someone has to enter. Zoro nodded. He wiped his face. He sheathed the 3 katanas. He took the first step inside, and the second, and he entered the chamber with eyes ready. What he saw inside, the historians will not record in full, because Zoro never told it, because what he saw cannot be translated into words. He saw 2 figures on an altar, one young with a straw hat, one older with disheveled red hair, the 2 of them together, the 2 still, the 2 at peace. He saw the golden light. He saw the Nika floating above the young one's chest. He saw the scroll against the older one's heart. He saw Griffin on the floor, but he saw something more, something that made him drop to his knees, something only he saw that he carried with him to the end of his days in silence. The Mugiwara behind him heard Zoro cry for the first time in 10 years, a weeping that sounded like the end of an era, like a king finally fallen. When Zoro came out of the chamber hours later, he had the straw hat in his hand and the scroll folded against his chest. He answered nothing more. Nami wanted to speak. Sanji wanted to ask, but Zoro lifted his eyes and said only one thing. Back to the Sunny. Time to set sail. Last order. No one asked which one. No one dared. The Mugiwara walked in silence toward the beach, while the island of Laugh-Tale faded behind them, slowly going invisible. The Red Force, anchored in the other bay, was empty. Beckman, Yasop, Lucky Roo, all of the Redhead's crew had left. No one knows where. It is said they still sail, searching for their captain, refusing to believe he's gone. It is said they sing Roger's lullaby every dawn. The Mugiwara set sail at noon. The Thousand Sunny pulled away from Laugh-Tale with 9 crew members, not 10. No one spoke for 3 full days at sea. On the 4th day, Zoro gathered the Nakama on deck. He read them the last order the captain had left before going into the temple. If I don't come out, keep sailing. Don't mourn me more than 3 days. Laugh like always, and if anyone asks about me, tell them I lived free. The Mugiwara wept. all 3 days. They reached the 4th day and looked at one another, and then the boy from Fusha's wish was honored. Nami smiled first, then Usopp, then Chopper, then everyone, and they laughed. They laughed like before. They laughed because the captain had ordered it. Love commands laughter. But this story, like all the true ones, doesn't end where it seems to end, because the hat Zoro carried never again touched a human head. Zoro carried it in his hand. He never put it on. He never let anyone else put it on. The hat was waiting, the way it had waited in Fusha. And one night, months later, when the Sunny was sailing the waters of the East Blue under a full moon, Zoro did something he had never done. He set the hat on the captain's empty chair on the upper deck. He left it there without a word. He went to sleep without looking back, and the wind moved it just a little, as if an invisible hand had touched it, as if someone, somewhere, had started breathing again. The next morning, when Nami climbed up to the deck, the hat was on the floor, fallen, but on the right side, not the left. No one had touched it. No one had come up at night. Only Zoro knew. Only the wind knew. And in the wind, perhaps, someone else knew. Because behind that door at Laugh Tale, beneath the golden light Zoro had crossed, something was still waiting to be told to the whole world. Maybe Luffy breathed that morning on the altar of Joy Boy. Maybe the hat is already finding its way back to the head of its true owner. Maybe the laughter of Nika is searching its way home through currents we do not see, toward the boy who never stopped waiting for it. What we do know, the only thing the sea has confirmed, is this. There was a day in the last port when a redhead wept. He wept for a boy he loved more than anyone, and that weeping, the elders of the islands say, broke the curse of 8 centuries, because an heir of the broken pact, for the first time in 800 years, chose not to repeat it, chose to give back what his whole bloodline had once stolen. In the last sea, kings are not measured by what they take, but by what they give back. That morning, there was a full return at last, and the world changed without knowing. The cycle broke. The void century ended with a tear, not a sword, with love, not with war. You who listen to this story to the very end know something most don't. You know the true treasure was never hidden for 8 centuries. It was in Shanks giving the hat to the boy in Fusha. It was in Luffy trusting against all evidence. It was in Roger writing a letter with love. The true treasure cannot be stolen. It can only be lived, and it can only be given back at the end of the journey with open hands always. We return to the beginning, to that very first image, a redhead kneeling, a stained hat in his hands, a boy he had sworn to protect to the end. Now you know how that scene ended. You know what the hat was holding. You know what the redhead whispered before extinguishing his own heart inside. And you know what hasn't ended yet, because an empty chair on a ship is not a goodbye. It's an invitation. The sea always gives back. Drop a black flag in the comments if you believe Shanks redeemed himself that morning on the altar. Drop a golden sun if you believe Luffy woke up. And if this story made you feel something, share it with someone, because the true kings don't reign. The true kings give themselves up. The true kings set free. In the last sea, kings are not measured by what they take, but by what they give back. And you now decide what kind of king you'll be. The hat still rests on the empty chair of the Sunny. The wind still moves it every night. And somewhere, someone is starting to open his eyes.